Before Hollywood broke her heart, Winona Ryder was the face of a generation. Fragile, rebellious, and untouchably magnetic. But behind that soft voice and dark-eyed mystique, a quiet rebellion was taking shape. She wasn't just another Hollywood starlet. She was the girl who refused to play by its rules. And for that, the industry turned its back on her. In the early 1990s, she was everywhere. The ethereal beauty of Edward Scissorhands, the lost soul of Girl, Interrupted, the gothic muse of Beetlejuice. Every director wanted her. Every magazine adored her. And yet, within a few short years, she would become a pariah, whispered about, mocked by tabloids, erased from casting lists. It wasn't drugs. It wasn't scandal, at least not in the way Hollywood liked to sell it. What happened to Winona Ryder was far more insidious. A betrayal wrapped in glamour. A cautionary tale about what happens when a woman in Hollywood dares to stay human. When the cameras stopped rolling, she found herself standing alone against a system that demanded submission and perfection. The shoplifting incident would become a convenient excuse, a public execution disguised as entertainment, but the truth behind it is darker, lonelier, and infinitely sadder. This is not just the story of a fall from grace. It's the story of a woman who carried the weight of an industry's hypocrisy and somehow found her way back. Because sometimes, in Hollywood, survival isn't about winning. It's about refusing to disappear. It was the end of the 1980s, a time when Hollywood shimmered with the last glow of its golden age. The studios still had power, but the world was changing. The glossy perfection of the 1980s It Girl was giving way to something more complex, more real. And into that fragile cultural shift walked a young woman from Winona, Minnesota. Small, pale, and unlike anyone else. Winona Ryder didn't look like a movie star. She looked like the girl who read poetry in the back of the classroom, the one who saw things no one else noticed. When she appeared in Tim Burton's Beetlejuice at just 17, her gothic charm and quiet sadness captured something raw, a reflection of a generation that was growing tired of fake smiles and plastic dreams. Her rise was meteoric. From Heathers to Edward Scissorhands, she embodied the soul of youth. Disillusioned by conformity. She wasn't selling sex or glamour. She was selling truth. And in a town built on illusion, truth was dangerous. As the 1990s dawned, Hollywood's identity began to fracture. The indie boom was reshaping cinema, and Winona became its accidental queen. She moved effortlessly between studio blockbusters and art house dramas, collecting award nominations and critical acclaim. Directors described her as fragile but fearless. Audiences saw themselves in her, the loneliness, the quiet strength, the search for belonging. But fame, as always, comes with a price. Behind the bright lights, the industry began to whisper. She was too intense, too sensitive, too opinionated. In meetings, her empathy was mistaken for weakness. Her refusal to play the fame game, to flirt with power, to compromise her identity, made her unpredictable. And unpredictability in Hollywood is a sin. By the time she reached her late 20s, the fragile dream was cracking. The very qualities that had made her a star were now being used against her. Her vulnerability was rebranded as instability. Her honesty as arrogance. The stage was set, not for her next great performance, but for her downfall. At the height of her fame, Winona Ryder was more than a movie star. She was an idea. The embodiment of melancholy, intellect, and rebellion. She was the dream girl of outsiders, the muse of misfits, the fragile heartbeat of an era that wanted to feel something real again. By the early 1990s, every major filmmaker wanted her. Francis Ford Coppola cast her in Bram Stoker's Dracula. Martin Scorsese offered her The Age of Innocence, and Tim Burton, who once said she had a face you never forget, built worlds around her emotional depth. She was nominated for Oscars, won Golden Globes, and became a cultural symbol. But what made Winona different wasn't her fame. It was her refusal to bend to. She rejected the Hollywood party scene, avoided plastic surgeries, and turned down roles that objectified her. She still lived like a small-town girl, quiet, polite, and searching for meaning in an industry that had none. Then came the heartbreaks. Her engagement to Johnny Depp, one of the most publicized romances of the decade, ended abruptly, leaving her devastated. Paparazzi swarmed her like vultures, capturing her every tear, every silence, every stumble. She once confessed that after their breakup, she would sit alone watching old movies, unable to stop crying. But Winona was determined to keep working. She poured her pain into her roles. In Little Women, she gave a performance so tender and honest that critics called it the soul of a generation. Yet behind the accolades, her private battles deepened. The anxiety, the insomnia, the overwhelming pressure to be perfect. Hollywood didn't see a human being. It saw a commodity that was starting to crack. By 2001, her carefully built world collapsed in a single afternoon, inside a Beverly Hills department store, under the sterile glare of security cameras. A moment that would change everything. The media would call it the shoplifting scandal. But that label was just a headline, one that would bury the truth of what really happened, and what that moment revealed about the cruelty of fame. December 12, 2001. Beverly Hills, Saks Fifth Avenue. The image was burned into the collective memory. Winona Ryder, once the face of 1990s cinema, being escorted out of the luxury department store in handcuffs. The tabloids called her a thief. The headlines screamed, "Fallen Angel." And in a matter of hours, a decade of brilliance was erased by a single mugshot. But what really happened that day and why? Behind the sensational headlines, there was no evidence of a desperate kleptomaniac. No drugs, no violence, just confusion, exhaustion, and a woman on the verge of collapse. Later, Winona would quietly admit that she had been struggling with severe anxiety and was taking prescribed painkillers after a back injury. The combination of medication and emotional strain left her detached, foggy, a ghost moving through her own life. Hollywood didn't care. The machine smelled blood. The same studios that once fought for her name on a poster suddenly stopped returning her calls. Producers dropped her from projects overnight. Fashion magazines that had worshipped her image now dissected her downfall with glee. In interviews, she refused to play the victim. "It wasn't the end of the world," she said softly years later. But it felt like it at the time. What few knew was that Winona didn't just lose her reputation. She lost her sense of self. For years, she disappeared completely. No premieres, no interviews, no roles. She retreated into silence, finding solace in reading, painting, and the quiet company of friends. Far from the spotlight, yet even in exile, Hollywood couldn't quite forget her. Directors like Tim Burton and David Fincher called her a real actor in a fake world. Fans held vigils online, writing letters and petitions begging for her return. The truth, buried beneath the tabloid frenzy, was this: Winona Ryder never betrayed Hollywood. Hollywood betrayed her. It turned a moment of human weakness into a public crucifixion, a punishment for daring to be imperfect in an industry that feeds on flaws but punishes those who show them. And somehow, against all odds, she would rise again, because legends, even when broken, don't disappear. They wait quietly for the world to remember. When we look back at Winona Ryder's story, it's easy to focus on the scandal, the flashbulbs, the courtroom, the fall. But if you look deeper, past the noise, what emerges is something far more profound. A reflection of Hollywood's cruelty toward those who don't conform. Winona's crime was never theft. It was non-compliance. She refused to become a machine-made version of herself, the kind that smiles for the camera, hides the pain, and obeys without question. She wanted to make films that mattered, to live quietly, to be authentic. And in a system addicted to perfection, that authenticity became her undoing. The shoplifting incident was not the end of Winona Ryder's story. It was a mirror that showed us the hypocrisy of an industry that preaches compassion yet thrives on humiliation. The same people who had once praised her sensitivity now used it to define her as unstable. The same studios that built her image profited from tearing it down. But time, as always, tells a different story. The rise of the internet allowed audiences, not tabloids, to rewrite her narrative. They remembered the Winona who made them feel less alone. The girl who didn't look or act like anyone else on screen. The woman who gave voice to fragility, heartbreak, and quiet strength. When she returned in Stranger Things, it wasn't just a comeback. It was a resurrection. The world had changed. We had changed. And suddenly, everything she had once been punished for, her sincerity, her emotional depth, her refusal to fake it, became her greatest power. Legends and Secrets believes that stories like Winona Ryder's matter, because they remind us of something vital. Fame is not forgiveness, and vulnerability is not weakness. Behind every headline, there is a human being. One who bleeds, loves, and tries to survive in a system that often forgets what humanity looks like. And perhaps that's why Winona's story endures. It's not about a fall from grace. It's about grace itself, reclaimed in silence on her own terms. Today, when Winona Ryder appears on screen, there's a quiet ache in her eyes, the kind that only comes from having lived through both love and exile. She no longer glows with the restless innocence of youth, but with something richer, survival. Every line on her face tells a story that Hollywood once tried to erase. Time, it seems, has finally caught up with her truth. The world that once punished her for being fragile now celebrates her for being real. In Stranger Things, audiences didn't just see Joyce Byers. They saw Winona, reborn from the ruins, protecting what matters, fighting invisible monsters, and holding on to the flicker of hope in the darkness. It was art imitating life, or perhaps life finally finding peace through art. For decades, Hollywood has adored these phoenixes, stars who crash, burn, and rise again. But Winona's rebirth wasn't loud or triumphant. It was quiet, almost hesitant, like the turning of a page. She didn't need to prove herself to anyone anymore. She had already survived the worst thing fame could do, make her forget who she was. In the end, maybe that's the true secret behind Winona Ryder's story. Not the scandal, not the silence, not even the comeback, but the choice to remain human in a place that rewards everything but humanity. And so, as her story continues to unfold, somewhere between memory and myth, we're left with a haunting truth. Some stars fade, others fall. But the ones who endure do so because they refuse to stop feeling. Some stories are never revealed. But now you know.